Come on, let's go clap. We're welcoming you back. You're welcoming us back. It's amazing. We're so glad to be here, right? I'm glad. He's glad. She's glad. We're all glad. Hi. There's people here. There's people there. It's amazing. So, welcome back to .NET Front End Day. I am David Ortinau, and we're going to be doing a survivalist guide to .NET Maui. If you like to do survivalisty things, go out in the woods and see if you're going to live or die. It's not going to be as exciting as this. This is going to be amazing. I almost called it like a champion's guide to .NET Maui, but that sounded a little too presumptuous, I guess. I don't know. My contact information on the screen. I'll bring up some contact information later as well. I invite you to reach out to me anytime. I am a principal product manager at Microsoft. I work on the .NET team, specifically client applications. And so our products for client applications, Xamarin has been around for years and years and years. And then now the new upgrade version of that is .NET Maui, multi-platform app UI. I have been at Microsoft for about 6 years. You saw Maddie earlier. We obviously are a goofy pair. I don't know if you think all Americans are like this. They're not really. We're just weird. But we enjoy, talking to developers and companies all the time to find out how we can leverage .NET technology and Visual Studio to help you individually make more money. Who wants more money? All right, a couple people in the back did not raise their hand. I don't know. Cool. Also to help businesses be more effective, right? Doing the things that you're doing. So that's some information about me. I want to give you a quick update. This isn't something I have done on this trip at all, but I thought it would be useful because it seemed like quite a few folks here might be new to .NET and or new to .NET for client applications in particular. So .NET as a platform, you can build pretty much anything. You can build IoT stuff with it. You can build APIs. You can build web apps. You can build, of course, mobile desktop apps and a whole variety of other things. They run on the Raspberry Pi. You could probably control your refrigerator with it. You never know. So as a development platform, things are going really well. Over 5 million developers, faster, 10 times faster than Node.js on the server. So lots of good things happening there. If you're looking for technology to take a bet on that's going to be around for a while, because it's already been around for 20 years. I mean, obviously, I was born 19 years ago, so I'm just barely younger than .NET. Okay, I got some smiles. I got some laughs on that one. No, but it's been around a while. You can bet on it. I know people often will say, well, what about this product that went away and that product that went away? I mean, some of that's going to happen. I don't anticipate that happening with anything we're talking about today. In terms of, how are new versions of .NET going? We now ship new versions of .NET every year. In November, we host the .NET conference. It's an all online virtual conference, and you get a new version of .NET, which also gives you a new version of C#. So as new language features come out, you get new runtime and SDK capabilities. And now with .NET Maui being part of .NET, you now will also get the latest innovations for mobile and desktop applications. And as you can see, .NET is growing way faster in version 6 than version 5. The current version of .NET is 7, which we shipped November 8th, I think, of last year. And I went looking for the latest numbers. I know that in terms of .NET Maui, .NET 6 and .NET 7 are about to crisscross. So the .NET 6 usage has been declining and the .NET 7 usage is skyrocketing. So we're at that point where most apps now are going to be using .NET 7, I would say before the end of February. In terms of how is Maui doing as a platform? Well, we came out in May of last year. So at build, the mid-season of .NET 6 release, we shipped .NET Maui. We were a little late to the party because we were bringing all that old .NET framework, which was the previous iteration of .NET, all that Xamarin work, we were merging it, upgrading it, polishing it up, and making it pretty to be part of .NET. And that turned out, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but halfway into the project, you realize there's a whole lot more work than you realized at the beginning, right? Nobody? Never happens to you. You always know everything. Your estimates are perfect. Is that what I'm hearing? If I want to get estimates done, I come to Sweden. I got it. Um, so, we learned some things. We also, in the process of doing this, the whole .NET team as an organization grew in terms of our resiliency and our build pipelines and our integrations and things like that. Because building a platform for 4 different native platforms, Android, iOS, Mac, and Windows, you may not know it, but it's kind of hard. It's complicated, right? You want to build a platform that does one thing, that's relatively straightforward, right? But we're doing essentially one thing on 4 things. So, oh, I did want to call attention to that. The star history, that's the popularity of the Maui repository in the, do I get a laser? Is that a laser? Laser pointer. Look at that laser pointer. The blue right here, that's skyrocketing like an Elon Musk going to the cloud SpaceX thing. We don't like him, right? But it's still a thing. We like rockets. Who doesn't like rockets? Um, the ones that don't explode. We're talking about exploration rockets, scientific research rockets. This is important to clarify, right? Jimmy's laughing at all my jokes. That's all I need. Usually Maddie would be sitting on the front row egging me on. Yeah, so the popularity is there, and we're super excited about that. And you can see 235% growth since we launched. There was a little bit of a seasonal dip here when we got to the holidays, the December. Everybody that worked decided to go on vacation. That's typical. That's seasonal. But the numbers are all going in the right direction. So we love to see that. I want to give you an idea of what kind of apps are using .NET for mobile. So the M365 SharePoint admin, 4.6 stars, not too shabby, right? Over 1 million downloads. And look at those beautiful data screens to administrate your SharePoints. Uses a ton of .NET technology as well as a bunch of Azure and App Center services. Another great one is Microsoft Azure. So this is a mobile application you can use with our technology to administrate your Azure accounts. So you might actually like using this better than the web browser. It's less stuff on the screen and it might make sense. So again, over 1 million downloads, great store ratings, all using our technology, all native stuff. This is another one that Microsoft publishes, but it's kind of not really about a Microsoft service per se. It's Seeing AI. So this is an application that uses the camera, and it's to assist people that are, poorly sighted or not sighted. And it will basically say, hey, there's a person 5 feet away from you. It's a tall white man or whatever, or you point it at some paper or some letters and it will read it to you. So it's a really cool assistive device, a lot of AR technology at work within it, and it's all written with .NET. This one is from a customer, I believe, based in Germany, K2 Klima Campaign, which to me sounds Swedish almost. And actually, I feel like I found a Swedish alternative to it. But beautiful application, started on .NET Maui, shipped with .NET Maui, and it's all about awareness for climate change, what you could be doing with your teams, your organizations, etc. You can find this in the Android store, and I believe it's coming to the iOS store soon. Some of you who've ever done mobile development know it's a whole lot easier to get something into the Android store than it is the iOS store. And this is an app from Logius. It's the DigiID app. I never know quite how to say the name, DigiD. But if you live in the Netherlands, anybody here still from the Netherlands? Okay, we've got one. You got it on your phone? Yeah. Okay, yeah. So this is the app you use to identify yourself in the country. So whether you're interacting with services and things like that, it's a prevalent app. As a matter of fact, the Xamarin Forms version of this app is now open source, and the .NET Maui version of the app is in the final stages of QA and approval, and will be out sometime soon. It's not not my app. I can't make them ship it, but it'll come out soon. And it's a great app. People like it. Lots of other apps. We did some community stuff. You can go check out the .NET Maui showcase. As we have customers publicly announcing and sharing their apps, we will be able to publish them to the showcase. So if you're interested in seeing what's possible with .NET Maui, who's actually using it, this is a place you can go. And if you look at all the Xamarin stuff, that's all the same .NET technology that powers Xamarin. All right. So that was kind of the introduction. I thought that might be useful and interesting to get everybody up to speed on kind of what can you do with .NET Maui, how are people using it. And so now I would like to kind of get into the survivalist tips portion of using .NET Maui. I'll talk a little bit about workloads, upgrading for Xamarin. We'll talk about layouts in single project, and then we'll get into some how do you customize the UI and what is this hot reload stuff. Maddie showed hot reload, so if I am short on time, hot reload's going to get the axe. I'm going to cut it from the whole product. Cool. Everybody's with me so far? Excited? Everybody's thrilled? Yeah? What happens at football games here? Do you just like, is it quiet? I mean, I know I'm not an all-star football player. More booze? Okay. Booze, drinking. Okay. Well, we need to think about that for the next .NET front-end days. Yeah? Yes, there's always an organ player or a piano player trying to hype the crowd up. That's why I don't watch basketball. That's why I don't do it. It's hockey or maybe American football, but that's the Super Bowl is coming up Sunday, so I'll be flying home just in time for the family gathering. The family watches no football together until the Super Bowl, in which time it's all about the food. All right, so workloads, back on track. Workloads are essentially the installer for .NET, okay? So you download the installer for .NET and it will install .NET on your machine. And then the workloads are the different pieces of things you can do with it. So Maui is an additional workload that the .NET installer will install for you. So here's the thing. You have two options for managing your installation of .NET Maui. One is from the command line, and the other is from Visual Studio. If you are just getting started, use Visual Studio. Only use Visual Studio. Because what you don't want to do is try to install things through the command line and then Visual Studio, or start in Visual Studio and then go messing around with the command line. Because you can get your environment into a unstable state, and you don't want that. So there's my warning. There's a pitfall there. There's a bear trap, and you're going to step in it. Just don't do that. Yeah. So pick one. Pick your adventure here, and you'll be safe. So one of the things that I often get asked is, okay, I did this install. What version of .NET Maui do I have on my system? How do I know I have the latest version? You will always have the latest version if you have the latest version of .NET, because our versions are tied to the versions of .NET. The version numbers won't be exactly the same. You might have the 7.0.100 runtime installed, but the Maui SDK might be 7.0.58. The first two numbers should be the same. The last number could be different, okay? But what you can do is you can select inside of Visual Studio any of your Maui dependencies in the frameworks, and then you can look down here. That did zoom, didn't it? Sweet. Does it zoom on StreamYard too? Love it. Man, you do that in Teams? Not so much. Not so much. Yeah, so 7059, that is the version. How do I know if that's the latest version? Well, you can do a couple of things. You could go to the .NET Maui GitHub repository and look at the release notes. That will have the version number on it. You could also go to NuGet, because everything is actually distributed through NuGet.org. And over here, you can see that the latest manifest, I'm searching for Maui Manifest 7. The latest manifest for my architecture, which in this case is ARM64, is 7059. I have the right version. So, or I have the latest version. They're all the right version, but I have the newest. I have the latest. Okay. When you are back here in the command line, you can run a command .NET workload list. And .NET workload list will then tell you all the different workloads that you have installed. So if you're managing all of this directly in CLI, this is a very handy command to have. And you can see right here, I am on 7058 at the time that I was using this CLI. And it also tells me what version of the SDK my workload is associated to. Okay. You also have the ability from here to update. So you could run .NET workload update. However, again, if you're doing this from Visual Studio, don't do .NET workload update over here. Just don't do it unless you don't like your machine. And then you can go to your boss and say, I don't know what happened. My machine doesn't work anymore. Maybe it's because it's 3 years old. I think I need a new Mac, right? Who wants a new Mac? Yeah, we want new Macs. And you say, Dave, but we're at a Microsoft office. Why are you telling us to get new Macs? Look at that. Windows running on my Mac. Yeah, woo! You like that, don't you? This is an ARM64 image of Windows running on my Mac M1 with Visual Studio and .NET Maui all working. We've had several people ask us, when can I use this? Soon. This is an internal preview. I am dog fooding for your benefit so I can file the bugs before you see them. Or at least make sure they get fixed before we ship the thing. All right, cool. You can also get your .NET downloads from the website. But the one thing that I wanted to point out, yes, this is going to give you the very latest version. You can click the side and make sure you get the ARM64 version if your machine wants ARM64. But I wanted to point out that if you go to the .NET installer, GitHub repo, you can get all of those directly from here. Plus, you can get the preview versions, and you can even get older versions of the installer if you need them. So if you are really particular about exactly which version you're using and everything, I recommend bookmarking the GitHub for .NET installer. So here are some of the commands, the command line commands I use on a regular basis. .NET SDK check is going to tell me all the .NET versions of things on my machine. .NET version, of course, is the current version running. If you have one app that needs to run on one version and you have another app that is stuck on a different version, you can use a global.json file. It's documented in docs.microsoft.com, which now is called learn.microsoft.com. And that global JSON, you can put the version of .NET you want to pin to, and then everything under that directory on your file system will stay on that version of .NET. Okay. .NET workload list, we already talked about. .NET workload install Maui probably requires admin permissions. That will, of course, go get the latest version of Maui. The one thing that you want to make sure of before you run install or update, if you are a command line person, is make sure you understand what NuGet paths are going to be used to resolve the workloads that you're going to get. Because what happens, right? The .NET installer looks at NuGet and says, what are all the sources of workloads that I might be able to pick from? It then goes to those sources on the internet and says, hey, do you have Maui? This guy's asking to install Maui. And the source says, oh yeah, I've got version blah, blah, blah. Or it says, I don't have that. And then it comes back after querying all of them and it says, well, I found something and I'm going to install it. And if you have a path that has something that you don't want to install, you're going to end up with it, unfortunately, because you just need to be very aware of what the NuGet paths are, what the sources are in your path. So if you run .NET NuGet list source, it will tell you, I'm going to go to the official NuGet repository. I'm going to go to Billy Bob's Emporium for NuGets. And you might be wondering, where did Billy Bob's Emporium for NuGets come to my machine? You put it on there somewhere. I don't know. There is no Billy Bob's. It's a fake NuGet source. The last command I'll talk about is which.net. Which.net will show you where .net is on your machine that it's using. Because if you get into a gnarly state, a bad state on your machine, you're going to want to know. So in my case, it's the user directory, and then I've got all my files here, and I can go check inside of my SDK manifests, inside of my SDK, what is actually installed there if I have questions. Because if I, on a Mac, get into a bad state, I have a shell script I can run. This shell script comes from the Microsoft documentation, so I didn't make this up. I'm not recommending something to you that isn't in our documentation. And you can see it's going into my .NET folder, and it's removing the specific versions of all of these things to reset me so that I can make sure I unravel whatever it is that I just did that got me into a bad state. But you're all going to be perfect. You're already excellent estimators. So I know that you're only ever going to install just the right thing. Yeah? Yeah? All right. Okay, let's talk a little about upgrading from Xamarin. How many of you have Xamarin applications that you would like to upgrade? All right, so this is for you and probably most of the people online. So in upgrading your application, firstly, we did an amazing job. I shouldn't say it that way because that makes it sound like I did something. The team, the engineering team, the brilliant brains behind my words did an amazing job maintaining compatibility between Xamarin and .NET 6, .NET Maui. But that's not to say that they didn't also create a little bit of work for you, okay? We care about you so much that we wanted to make sure that you could bill more hours and make more money, but that means you have to do a little more work. So you have two options when upgrading your applications. The first one is the .NET Upgrade Assistant. What this command line tool will do for you is it will move your projects from the existing Xamarin project style, which is kind of a unique thing that Xamarin did. It will move it to the standard SDK project style, which all the rest of .NET uses. So of course, you see the immediate benefit there is that now I'm doing everything the same way as ASP.NET, as console apps, as IoT apps, it's all the same. And then it's going to do some modification to your code, changing namespaces because we moved from Xamarin namespaces to Microsoft namespaces. It's going to change a few types. So we went from one type, color, to colors, which is an enum of all the different named colors, and then color, the type. So a few things like that, it's going to update for you. And then it's going to evaluate the NuGet packages in your solution. And it's going to say, we know the upgraded replacement for this one, so we'll swap it out for you. Or it'll report to you, we can't find or we don't know anything about this NuGet dependency. It doesn't appear to be compatible. We need you need to take a task and go figure out what's the replacement for that NuGet package. All right, and then once you get that done, you're going to then compile and run your app. It's going to leave it in all the same folders where it was. Of course, you as perfect estimators and hard workers have made sure to use Git. And so you have a backup, of course, of your application, right? If you don't, the .NET Upgrade Assistant will make a folder copy for you. But then you're just going to start compiling your app and seeing if you can get it to run. And as you get errors, you're going to solve those errors. It's pretty straightforward. With the help that I'm now going to also provide you. The second option is, you know what? I don't want to use the Upgrade Assistant. I want a single projectify and go all the way to the front edge of Maui. And you can do a file new Maui project and then just copy pasta or copy paste all of your code over, right? Well, most of your code. You don't need actually all of it because we reduced your need for some of it. But all of your code, you can copy that over and start modifying those namespaces yourself, do those manual steps, and get yourself into a place where you can start building. I personally like copy pasta because I know the namespace changes, I know the type changes, I know how to use search and replace in VS Code. and I can be done with that in just a few minutes. As a matter of fact, the community toolkit for Maui has a script that you could run from the command line that they used to upgrade their projects from Xamarin to .NET Maui. And it will do a bunch of those redundant search and replaces for you. All right. So I kind of already went over this, but these are the steps that you will take when upgrading your applications to .NET 6. Or at this point, since .NET 7 is the latest release, why not go all the way to .NET 7? We will start previewing .NET 8 in a few hours, not too long from now. Actually, it'll be 2 weeks, I think, from now-ish. That's not public information, except for the part that I just announced it on a live stream. But I didn't give you a date, so really it's still pretty vague. We're good. Yeah, so I would go to the latest edge. 6 and 7 are very similar. And you may be saying, but wait a second, I really want to go to 6 because 6 is a long-term servicing release, right? LTS. LTS means that it's supported by Microsoft for 3 years as opposed to the typical 1 year. And actually, that's not the case for Maui. Even though Maui runs on .NET 6, because of the dependencies on external build tools like Android and iOS, we actually support every release of Maui for 18 months. So from November until May the year 18 months, right? So that's always the case for Maui. There is no LTS for Maui. Always with mobile, you have to stay on the cutting edge of what the underlying platforms are doing. All right, so I mentioned that NuGet dependencies need to be resolved. Not all NuGets are going to be compatible. So here on this side, we've got ZXing, which is a barcode scanning library from Reth. If you don't know Reth, Reth is Jonathan Dick. He is based in Toronto, Canada, and he is the lead engineering manager of the .NET Maui team. So this is a very popular library, 3.8 million downloads. We know lots of companies depend upon this. And so if we look at this package and we go to the Frameworks tab on NuGet, you'll notice, oh, wow, it lists .NET 6 and .NET 7. It must be compatible, right? Well, the shading of blue matters. The light blue essentially means we have computed that there is a possibility that these frameworks may be supported. The dark blue says, yeah, we know these are supported. These are explicitly supported. So what I'm saying is don't believe the light blues. The light blues do not mean it's compatible. Trust the dark blues. Because in this case, that package is not compatible. If we scooch over with my cursor to ZXing.NET Maui, this is a re-release of this package by John. And you'll see that these are all dark blue and it's all they support. And he even changed the name of it because the other one had forms in the name, and that doesn't make sense in a .NET Maui world, right? So this is a package you can depend on, and there's that explanation right there of the colors in shorter words than I used. All right. So here's another example. In this particular case, this package, plugin fingerprint, allows you to do biometric login with your mobile applications. And I know I'm talking a lot about mobile. We'll get to some desktop stuff here, perhaps a little bit later, time permitting. This is for biometrics, and you'll see that I've got dark on the Xamarin iOS, Xamarin Mac. That's great. So there's some Xamarin support. Mono Android, that's actually Xamarin as well. That's Mono is a, well, actually, you're going to be here for Rich Campbell's From Mono to .NET Maui presentation later, right? So I'm not going to tell you about that. He's going to tell you all about that. But we also do have the dark blues here. So they can coexist in the same NuGet package. It's a matter of how the developer chose to add support and redistribute it. In this case, there was no reason to fork plugin. There's no reason to fork plugin.fingerprint into separate packages for naming purposes. So he chose to just add those framework support. So this one's good to go. You can use this in your .NET Maui projects. Now here's another one. And this one is not compatible, but it's also listing all of these other frameworks up here. The reason that it's not going to work is because all of these Xamarin binaries essentially are not going to be compatible with .NET 6, .NET 7, .NET 8. They need to be recompiled against the latest versions of .NET. And that's why we're looking for those dark blues up there. Cool? Make sense? All right. Let's talk a little bit about the layouts within your application and some of the changes that were made between Xamarin and .NET Maui. So in Xamarin, all layouts, you could specify the size you wanted for that layout, but it may not always be honored at runtime. So that's why our width and our height, the actual names of those properties, are width request and height request. And that's not something that we chose to do from the beginning. Remember that Xamarin Forms is actually, at this point, like 9 years old as of today. And so back when Xamarin Forms, the first version ever shipped, I mean, iPhone screens were like this big, and they were all the buttons were rounded and beveled and leathery. You remember leathery buttons? You remember the calendar? It was like, this is your home journal or whatever. That's when we first shipped. And back then, when you put a layout value into iOS, it was like, if there's space, I'll give it to you. But if there's not, sorry. And so that's why it's called that. And that's why the rule in Xamarin Forms was, we'll try to honor it, but we can't guarantee you the underlying platform will allow us to. Well, in .NET Maui, that's no longer the case. Why? Because we've learned over those 8, 9 years from talking to developers that when you say this should be 200 units wide, what do you expect? 150. Yeah, right. Do you expect it to be 200? Man, that was a softball question. I thought that would be super easy. Anyway. All right, so grid, what have we done to grid? Columns and layouts in Xamarin Forms would be inferred from the content. So you didn't always have to specify them. If you were expecting that to happen in .NET Maui, that's not the case anymore. Now you have to explicitly say, my columns are this way, my rows are this way. Why? Well, we also heard from you, you want layouts to be fast. You want your UI to be fast and render quickly and scroll well. If the layout code needs to go infer columns and rows and rebuild its matrix in order to do those things, that's going to be slower. So we removed all that workaround hacky code and said, look, just tell us what you want the grid to be, and we'll make the grid that. So that's a change that you'll want to address when you're looking at your layouts and wondering why are things not exactly on the pixel compared to Xamarin Forms. Horizontal and relative layout and scroll view, you can see several of the other changes that were made here. If these are things that are impactful to your application and you're like, oh, I need to reference this, this is in the documentation that will be published any moment now. We have a pull request that is being thoroughly reviewed, and it's also on our GitHub. So you can find this information online. A couple of other things that have changed, some of the default values have changed. In Xamarin Forms, all of these values were 6. Why were they 6? Nobody knows. New developer coming in is wondering, where's this sizing coming from? And they find out that it's 6, and they ask us, why is this 6? I didn't want 6. What do you think I want 6? And I mean, it's 666. That's like the mark of the beast. So now we're in trouble. Like, why would I use this product? So anyway, those values and perhaps some others that I'm not listing, pretty much everything's been zeroed out. Default colors also zeroed out. So no arbitrary colors that don't make sense coming from which platform, nobody knows. What we have done in terms of colors is we have provided a default style sheet, a resource dictionary with base colors. When you start a new Maui application, you get styles, implicit styles and some explicit styles for all of your controls, and it's based on Fluent UI. So your app will basically look fluent, which is the Microsoft design system. It's very material-like, so I think you'll like it. It's good. It's purple, so that's .NET. We like purple. Oh, I never did fix this. Somebody pointed out my my code problem here. So grid in the opening, stack layout in the closing. Rookie mistake. We could blame the IDE for that one. Have you ever tried to change the IDE's thing and the closing brace doesn't update? Never happened to you? No, never. Yeah, okay. Visual Studio for Mac user. Um, so anyway, stack layout. Essentially, we no longer really just don't use and expand. It never really did what most people thought it did to begin with. It was, again, hacky in Xamarin Forms and unpredictable. So we removed that. The main thing is that stack layouts don't subdivide the space based on children. A stack layout is dumb. Actually, all the layouts in Maui are dumb because dumb is fast. You can do dumb super quick, right? And so rather than being witty and clever, we decided let's make it fast and give you, the developer, the power to express the layouts the way you want them. So a stack is going to just lay out the children until the children are done being laid out. Doesn't matter how tall or how wide that happens to be. Um, if you're using Flex Layout, if you like Flexbox, you're a web developer, and you're like, oh, I understand Flexbox, let's totally do that. My only comment on this, I love Flex Layout, but be careful. It is, there are some dragons in that code right now, and the team is working through fixing those bugs. I actually was reviewing the latest pull requests last night as I was falling asleep, and I noticed that some of the Flex Layout bugs are being addressed, so I'm super excited about that. So just go into that with your eyes wide open. If you haven't figured this out, I don't stand up here painting a picture of paradise. I want to give you the information to give you, it's a survivalist guide, right? I'm telling you where the traps are. I'm telling you where the hornets are. What kind of bugs do you have here? You have bugs that hurt you? Hornets, yeah, okay, cool. That worked. That's fantastic. Um, so I speak the truth. Yeah, all right. Custom layouts. If you really want a fast layout and you don't want to mess around with any of the other layouts, write your own custom layout. I love this one. It's a horizontal wrap layout. You can find the examples here from Easy Heart's repository, custom layout samples. And as you can see, I just drop my content in there and it just lays it out, just wraps it right around. Fantastic. I use this layout all the time. And the great thing is that there's really just two methods to override when doing a custom layout: measure and arrange the children. And you're off to the races. The other nice thing about custom layouts, if you've never used this before, is any layout can become bindable. So if you have a data set and you're looking to just repeat that data, some platforms call it a repeater, an item repeater, an items layout. Um, in Maui, any layout can become a bound layout using bindable layouts. You can provide it the data source and you can provide it the item template, and you are off to the races. The only thing about it is that it's not virtualized. So if you have a large data set that needs to be virtualized, you want to use list view or collection view. All right, single project. I think we've seen some of the single project earlier in the presentations. I wanted to call attention to a few things about images. Single project's awesome because you have one project and it can go to all 4 platforms. It's essentially write your code in one place and get it everywhere it needs to go. You still have the ability to do platform-specific things when you need iOS to do just that one thing or Windows to do just that specific Windows experience. But for the most part, it's all in one place. When you put SVG images into your application, which is awesome, note that by default, they are going to be generating PNGs. Why? Well, SVG rendering at runtime can be really slow. And we want to make sure, again, your apps by default are fast. And so that means that we want to use PNGs. That's going to be the fastest way to go. You are still able to, on some platforms, it's a quirk. This is a quirk we did not intend. You are able to actually maintain the SVG extension on some platforms when writing your code, and that image will appear. It's still not an SVG. It is a PNG. So be aware of that. If you need SVG support, you can do it with Skia Sharp, a library that does vector-based drawing. You could also do it with FFimage, which is, I learned it's actually fast forward images. I did not know it stood for fast forward, probably because I never read the documentation. But it is a library that's super popular in Xamarin, and we are working on a pull request to make it compatible with .NET Maui. We have it running, needs to be thoroughly tested, packaged, and shipped. And then you can also see in your CS Proj if you want to mess around with the images and opt out of that sizing or tell it a default size. You also have some color options. All this is documented. You can do all of that in the CS project. Maui does awesome things for you with app icons and splash screens. So if you've ever done any application, desktop or mobile, you end up generating tons of sizes and shapes of your splash screens and your app icons. Maybe you enjoy doing this by hand. Maybe this is a sadistic thing that you like to have your children do when they don't clean their rooms. But Maui does this for you. How? You just tell it what your asset is. And if it's an SVG, you're doing better because it then can size it for each thing. And we have a build task that will take this and generate all your splash screens. Same thing for your app icons. It will take those SVGs. You can have a background SVG and a foreground, and it will generate all the PNGs for you at build time. Super convenient, very easy to use. If, on the other hand, you don't want to do that and you say, oh, but I have a storyboard for iOS or I have a custom XML layout for Android, you can totally still do those things too. If you're bringing them from Xamarin, you can copy them over from Xamarin. Very straightforward. All you need to do, for example, in iOS is bring your launch storyboard into the iOS platform folder and then add it to your info plist. And if you were using the storyboard before with your iOS application, then you're probably already well familiar with the info plist, and that would make sense. All right, so I think we've got a few minutes, yeah? 8-ish until questions. Control customizations, what can you do here? Well, in Xamarin, we had something called custom renderers. And a custom renderer, essentially, renderers themselves know almost everything they need to know about the upper framework of Xamarin. And that is bad for performance. That is like, you don't want that level of knowledge to be so intertwined. So what we did in .NET Maui is we re-architected the renderer pattern and we made handlers. Handlers are essentially, you have a cross-platform, let's say button. That button implements iButton, an interface that basically says, here's what a button should be. It should have some text, probably takes an image. It should have a click event, might have a hover event, all the things that you would think of for a button. It doesn't implement any of those things, but it tells you what a button should be. That's the cross-platform button. Now, in order for that button to do something, on iOS, the UI button, which is the native button, it needs to actually implement those things. So let's say that the iButton text, the button text, it maps that method, that property, to a handler. And so it's going to use typically an extension method that is going to apply the text to the UI button on iOS, and it'll do the right thing on Android, the right thing on Windows, the right thing on Mac, okay? But where does that leave custom renderers? We're on a slide about custom renderers, and I've told you all about handlers. Well, the team, again, in their wisdom, in their foresight, with their massive amount of skills, maintained great backwards compatibility. So you can bring your custom renderers from Xamarin land over to Maui land, and you can just use them as is. There's really only two things you have to do. One thing is you're going to remove the export renderer from the top of the custom renderer because we will no longer use reflection to find it, which Xamarin used a lot of reflection. Maui uses minimal reflection. Again, performance. And then you're going to use configure handlers. We use the same builder pattern that ASP.NET and other pieces of .NET use. And you're going to configure that handler here and just pass it in as a handler. So there's my custom renderer, and it just works. So that's not much code, right? Little bit of work for you, massive compatibility benefit. You don't have to rewrite your app. What about other customization techniques for UI? So handlers have another awesome benefit. We can provide hooks into the life cycle of every control for you to override things or to add behavior to things. So you can prepend to mapping, which means that the thing you want it to do is going to happen before Maui applies all of its behavior. You can modify an existing mapping, which I'll show an example of. So if you find a bug and you're like, I can't wait for Maui to release something, you can just apply that update in your own code using a modify mapping. Or you could append a mapping. Let's say there's a behavior you want to introduce to a control that isn't part of any other property. You can do that as well. So let's take a look at a bugs story. This is my story. I was building and I continue to noodle on this control gallery application. Actually, I could probably pull it up here. Here's my control gallery application. Would it look better in dark? It does? All right, so here's my dark. And so I've got my buttons page. Pull my buttons page up. And you can see I've got a representation of all these different buttons, and I've got code to show me what does the code look like for all of these different styles. If I want to do only C# UI, if I want to do XAML, if I want to style my button, what does that look like? All the properties, the visual states, et cetera, et cetera. And so I have this, and I was messing around with these buttons down here. And what I was looking at, I'm going to turn it back to light. Not because Jimmy says he likes it, but just because I want to. Oh, look at that. Did not style that very well, did it? That's okay. So my playground for the app. So what I noticed was that on iOS and Mac Catalyst, the icons were not aligned as pretty as they were on Android. I'm like, oh, Android actually looks better, which is unique because usually iOS looks better. And not my personal bias, just the way it works. And so I was like, oh, what's going on there? And it was around October time. And so we have Hacktoberfest. Anybody participate in Hacktoberfest? Okay. So it's run by DigitalOcean. If you want more nerdy t-shirts, then this is how you can win a t-shirt by contributing to open source projects. Sounds pretty good, right? And you might, who knows? You get some reputation online. You might get a new job, make more money. Just saying. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to Hacktoberfest this thing. And I did, which is amazing because I'm a product manager. I'm not a core engineer hired by Microsoft. I didn't go through the engineering. I'm just a contributor at this point, right? So I did this and it got merged and I was so excited. But now my app still looks like poo because I don't have the latest version of Maui, right? And so what do? You know what I did. I modified the mapping and I just took my code. This is the actual PR code down here. And in my Maui program, you could do it really anywhere that the code is going to get executed in your app. I went to the button handler and I said, hey, mapper, I want to modify you. And I specifically want to modify what you're doing with the content layout because you're doing it wrong. And I'm doing it only for iOS and Catalyst because that's where the bug is, right? And so then all I need to do is call this corrected method. And this corrected method in the Maui code base actually exists in an extension method somewhere else. But for my purposes, all I needed to do is make sure I could bring this code into my app. And then voila, all my buttons look awesome. Awesome buttons, right? Thank you for clapping for me with my prompting clap. Another thing you can do, and let's take a look at these entry fields, right? By default, with .NET Maui, it's native. And so entry fields are a perfect example of how each native platform looks really different, right? So I'm going to guess that when you got a design from your designer for your application, and it's awesome, it probably uses Helvetica, right? And it uses great, fluent colors. But they're going to pick one of these or none of these. They're not going to give you designs for all four and say, oh, I actually want it to look totally different everywhere. Not going to do that. So how can I get rid of all these different treatments of lines and start to align my design easily? So in this case, there is no property for me to modify. What I'm going to do is I'm going to tap into the entry handler and I'm going to append to mapping. And I get to call it whatever I want. No more borders. Just get rid of those borders. Let's make this what I like to call a naked entry, right? Just out there as God created it, naked. And so for each platform, I have to do a different thing. So the platform view is actually the native control. So UI text field on iOS and whatever the heck it is on Android, I don't really even have to know. What I do need to know is how to copy and paste from Stack Overflow. Who knows how to copy and paste from Stack Overflow? All right, so this is the easy part. Even if it's written in Java, even if it's written in Objective-C, I can figure this out because I'm a smart cookie. So on Stack Overflow, I'm like, how do I remove the background or the borders from an Android entry field? And I find it. And so then I just need to translate that into C# code. And so the trick is to set the background color to transparent. You would have thought of that on your own, given enough hours and time, right? That's how you get rid of borders on Android. I think iOS is actually the most straightforward. It's border style. You change it to none. Okay, I'm down with that. If you change the font weight of the input field on Windows to thin, it gets rid of the line. Isn't that fantastic? Fantastic. Courtesy of Stack Overflow. This is where the money is made, folks. All right, so, but you see how easy that was. How few lines of code, and I just need to put that somewhere in my project, wherever I decide is the best fit for it. You know, some people hate seeing the folder common in their projects. They're like, oh, that's cheating. You're probably doing something wrong. That's where I like to put stuff. It's like it's common. I use it all the time. All right, which brings us to hot reload, which you have seen, but I will show it here real quickly because I have this wonderful volume slider application here, right? So I can control things in my home, which I never actually finished this, but let's pretend it works. So I can, you know, get my slider going for Teams or whatever, but I actually want to have a plug up here to connect my iPad to my Windows desktop because I'm using messaging. I probably should have Gerald help me out with the Signal R thing and get this thing actually working. So what I can do here, and for time, I'll copy and paste the code. I was going to make you watch me type it, but so I've got a build method, and this build method I have hooked into using this metadata update handler. We have a, what do we call those things? Community stand-up about this, and there will be documentation about this. It's just this one bit of code. You put that into your app, and then you listen to that event somewhere in your page, which I'm listening to it right here. And then when that happens, I call reload UI, which is just going to re-invoke my build method. Does that make sense? Just, you know, tell me when the user hot reloaded something so I can intentionally call the build method. That's all I'm doing. So what I can do here real quick, add my connect button, do this, and then I have to remember control, yeah. Do you know when you do a shortcut and it includes multiple steps, multiple letters, do you know what that's called? Anybody? This is trivia. You're not gonna, it's fine. It's called a chord. So if you're a musician, that actually makes sense, chord. But I hate having to do more than one key. It's like, just give me one. All right, anyway. So I did this, right? And as a normal sane person, I like to hot reload on save. I think it's important. So control save, it's gonna boop, update it. Oh, there's my button. Oh, okay, cool. Well, there's the plug. Everybody saw the plug, right? Plug. Actually, it looks like a plug from here, from that angle. Yeah. Sometimes I think I'm gonna set things on fire with the way I have my plug plugged into stuff, but anyway. So now with my Fluent C# UI magic, I can start doing things like, okay, I'm gonna put it at the end, and that's going to boop, send it over there. Oh, wait, but that's not the end. Why? Because I have a grid, and my grid has multiple columns. So what am I gonna do? Well, I was a web developer back when you laid everything out with tables. So I know how to merge some cells and span some cells. I can do this. So I'm going to say, okay, column span, and I think it's 4. When's my 4? Oh, I go, whoa, stop, edit. Well, at least it didn't crash. All right, so 4, yeah? All right, I'm going to span 4 columns. That's where I want it. Want it right there. So C# hot reload on Windows, also running on ARM, also running in the latest Visual Studio. So pretty cool stuff. Hope you learned something. Hope you got something from this. Do we have any questions?
Thank you. My favorite, set the border to thin.
What?
That's my takeaway from your talk.
Yes.
Just set the border to thin and they will
Yes.
disappear.
Absolutely. Set the border thin. I wish I could set my border to thin. You know what I'm saying?
Same. But we do have some questions, and actually we do have some comments as well.
Yep.
Note that which.net is not usable on Windows. And then Mr. Sakamoto went in and said, instead, we can do it with where.xe.net.
Sounds good. Good
Yeah.
comment. Yep.
Oh, they are awesome in the chat room.
I wasn't being very inclusive of the Windows crowd, was I? I'm sorry.
We accept you. How does SAML work? Is it converted to C#? Is it happening at the build time or runtime?
So XAML uses its own compiler, the XAML C compiler, and it is going to compile it into IL, which is an intermediate language, and some other things. And then it is going to weave it in with the compiled C#. So if you are using other technologies like Fody Weaver or other things that mess with IL, interpreted, or what did I say, intermediate language, then that can actually cause some wonkiness, but it's basically compiled, yes. They're not exactly C# objects, no.
Awesome. Is there any possibility to customize Maui controls through control templates as we do in WPF?
Yeah, so there is one control in particular that is strong on control templates, and that is the radio button. But control templates are not supported across all of the controls in Maui. So I think it could be really interesting to have it everywhere, but it's not at the top of our product roadmap this time. Yeah. But do it on the radio button. I do it all the time on the radio button. So I understand why somebody wants to do it because it's pretty powerful.
Do we have any questions from the room? Yes.
She's going to the back. Can't see her on camera unless you turn the camera. Why would you do that?
So my question would be about the hot reload. It's cool and all, but if some of us who is not fortunate or more fortunate enough to not use Visual Studio but Rider,
yeah,
how will it work without that, or just with the command line, or how that, if we want to start a bit of adventure in the Maui world, but still want the ReSharper goodness?
So I would recommend looking at it's something that you're going to use yourself, but you're already using Rider, so you're already off the golden path on your own. You're off in the woods by yourself. You're a survivor. So you can go look at Ryan Davis's TBC project. If you don't remember that, tweet at me. I will share it again. It's on my, or toot at me if you're a Mastodon person. I'm on both. So what this project does is it runs a .NET Tool server instance. It watches your files, it recompiles and ships over the changes, and you have a NuGet listening inside of your application, and that performs those hot reloads for C# specifically. There used to be another option for XAML, LiveSharp, that is no longer being maintained. In terms of official support for scenarios outside of Visual Studio, I don't have anything for you at this time, I'm sorry. But I will take your feedback and I will write it down in a note.
Thanks.
Yeah.
All right, we are getting ready to get Ed up on stage. So thank you so much. There are a few questions still in the chat room, so feel free to jump in there. Or if you want, you can tweet. You're still on Twitter?
I do have an account because people keep adding me.
Yeah, you see.
People have questions.
You're on social.
I do it for the kids.
Yes, that's awesome. So either the chat or social. Awesome. Thank you so much.